With all the drinks out there, you want hydration that works. Liquid IV delivers extraordinary hydration with advanced science thanks to Live Hydra Science, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, vitamins, and nutrients. It's super simple. Just tear a pack open and pour it into a glass of water. Turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code SCARY at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop for better hydration today using promo code SCARY at liquidiv.com.
Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here, whether this is your first time or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. We often have nightmares that can be easily attributed to watching a scary movie or reading a ghost story, but sometimes we get those chilling dreams that cling to our mind and soul, haunting us for days. We can try to find solace in the fact that they are not real. But when the waking world becomes a nightmare, escaping its grasp feels like a distant hope as we are swallowed by despair. First, the chill of death, followed by what lurks beneath us. Finally, in our featured story, a nightmare vision. Before we get to our stories, I wanted to ask if you would consider joining our Patreon. We are fully funded by advertising, and while ads mean revenue, they disrupt the listening experience. We hear you when we read complaints of too many ads, but we can only decrease the ads if we increase the revenue we get from our sources such as donations, contributions, pledges, and subscriptions from our fans. Please consider joining our Patreon account as a paid member and help us build a revenue stream not dependent on ads. So, want to hear something scary? A living nightmare. Sometimes when dealing with supernatural encounters, you must take matters into your own hands or be plagued forever, like in this story inspired by Sid. I've often attracted unwanted attention from spirits. I've seen people made of shadows walking up our stairs, glowing auras lurking in corners and doorways, and apparitions that look exactly like a living person. I've had objects thrown at me and heard laughter and footsteps when I was home alone. It's all pretty normal for me. My oldest sister, Tina, experiences the same type of stuff. For that reason, we've always been extremely close. Nothing violent happened until I was 6 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night and realized I couldn't move. At first, I thought it was sleep paralysis. I've experienced it before, so I wasn't too panicked. So I waited to see and hear what I normally did, dancing shadows in the corner of my vision, a faint humming whisper. I was used to all of that. But this time, something different happened. I got really cold, like standing outside in a snowstorm kind of cold. But I was under 3 blankets and a quilt. An awful sense of dread pulled in my stomach, and I began to have trouble breathing. My heart pounded in my chest, its beats echoing in my ears like a drum. My eyes began to tear up as I desperately tried to regain control of my limbs so I could do something, anything, even just hide my face under blankets and pretend to sleep. But my body refused to respond, trapping me in a state of helpless terror. I could sense something in the doorway of my room coming closer and closer, moving past my little sister's bed and towards mine. It was like this emptiness that was threatening to devour me from the inside out. Just as I began to be able to move my arms again, I saw it in the dim golden glow of my nightlight. Or rather, I saw him. He was tall and bony, like a skeleton with only a paper-thin layer of skin covering his limbs. He had no eyes that I could see, but I still knew he was staring at me as he seemed to float over my bed. He towered over me. I was absolutely terrified and desperately begged for God to save me. The being reached out for me slowly, his long skeletal arms brushing against my sheets as his fingers touched my throat. His skin was so cold it burned a white hot like iron. I stared up at him, slightly sobbing. His blank, eyeless face was barely visible from inside the strange darkness around it. To this day, I'm uncertain if he was wearing a hood or if he was surrounded by shadows that somehow overtook every shred of light in my room. I thought at first that would be it, that he'd leave. What could he possibly want from me? He'd made it clear he could touch me, so that had to be the end. I'd blink and he'd be gone, proving it was simply a very bad dream. Only it wasn't. I could now move my hands and feet, but he was still there, hovering menacingly. No, this wasn't sleep paralysis. Then the figure moved again. It wasn't slow this time. He moved so fast, I didn't realize what he'd done until I felt him squeezing my throat so tightly I couldn't breathe. My eyes teared up as I tried to scream, but I couldn't make a sound no matter how hard I tried. I helplessly tried to elicit a sound, to let my little sister know she had to run and get help, to get to safety. But I couldn't. Darkness overtook me, and I slowly lost consciousness. And then I woke up, and it was morning. Sunlight filled my bedroom with a warmth that seemed too good to be true. I got up, feeling dazed and exhausted. My throat felt like it was on fire, but I assumed I was just thirsty or sick. What happened must have been a nightmare. But when I looked in my bedroom mirror, there were dark bruises on my neck. I told my mother about it, and she said the next time something like that happened to me, I should just pray. Pray as hard as I could. I tried telling her I had done that it hadn't worked, but she wouldn't listen. I had more bad experiences as I got older, but none were ever as scary as that one. However, over the past few weeks, I'd felt a horribly familiar cold, empty energy following me, and I'm afraid it's him. The dark entity that tried, but failed to kill me, ready for round 2. I confided in my sister Tina. She's now a practicing witch and has more knowledge surrounding the spirit world than I do. She was obviously concerned, and to my relief, she took me seriously. So she asked me for a piece of jewelry that I wear every day, and with the help of her roommate, who is also a witch, they placed protective wards on my most favorite necklace. I'm visiting her again soon, and she's going to help me pick out several protective stones to place throughout my room. I hope that'll help because there's only one issue with my necklace. I can't wear it to bed. And something tells me that the next time that spirit visits me at night, I might not wake up ever again. Are you plagued by the spirits and the paranormal? Can you communicate with them easily? If so, tell us your story by sending us an email at SomethingScary@snarled.com.
This is going to be the craziest summer I've ever had, so I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself on these long, hot days. Personally, the first thing I do every morning to make sure I can take on the day is get hydrated as soon as I wake up. With all the drinks out there, you want hydration that works. Liquid IV delivers extraordinary hydration with advanced science thanks to Live Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, vitamins, and nutrients. It's super simple. Just tear a pack open and pour it into a glass of water. My current go-to flavor is strawberry lemonade, and it's really good, y'all. Turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code SCARY at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop for better hydration today using promo code SCARY at liquidiv.com.
Some of us thrive on thrill-seeking, the rush of adrenaline as we push ourselves to the limit, becoming an addiction. But as rewarding as these challenges can be, some things are better left unexplored, as in this story written by Janine Pipe. I will never forget the day it happened. I come from an adventurous family. my parents were all about outdoor pursuits, thrill-seeking activities. Vacations were filled with adrenaline. Sure, we went to the beach, but it was to surf, dive, and parasail. We did it all. Rock climbing, parachute jumping, and of course, caving. Although I understood and respected the dangers of all these activities, I didn't really feel any fear. I truly believed I was in fact fearless and probably immortal too. Until that day. Of course, it made total sense that when I went off to college, I kept up with these adrenaline-fueled activities. And luckily, the campus and surrounding area had plenty to offer, including a huge cave system just outside the city. I'd been exploring caves for years and was confident and competent at the activity. I was neither careless nor reckless and always informed a friend of my whereabouts and timings, just in case I didn't come back when expected. But something that day made me push myself further than I should have, test my limits in a way that I should have known better than I do now. Part of the thrill of entering something like a cave, especially one you haven't been in before, is the unknown. Even if it has been explored hundreds of times by others, there's always the chance you might be the one to go a little further and uncover something fantastic. There's even more chance of this if the cave is regarded only accessible for the most highly trained cavers, and only a handful of people have ever actually entered its mouth. But as soon as I had learned of Oswald Cavern, I knew I had to descend down there and push myself into the darkness further than anyone had before. My research informed me the cave system had been there for centuries and had mostly been unexplored until the turn of the 20th century. Since then, most of them had been investigated, and of those, the vast majority were deemed safe enough for exploring. One had been entirely sealed off after an explorer had gone in and never returned, and after a safety team tried unsuccessfully to locate him, a ledge had been discovered with a sheer drop into a body of water. And then there was Oswald Cavern. Not off limits, but certainly not recommended either. I couldn't find a single report of someone having been in there in the last 50 years. So of course, that was the perfect destination for me. I made sure I had all my safety equipment, backup batteries and flashlights. I left a note for my roommate stating I'd been gone all day, but if I wasn't home by dark, to alert SAR, and off I went. The thrill of entering a new cave is about as high as you could imagine. I had a GoPro with night vision strapped to my shoulder, recording everything. The descent wasn't easy, but I hadn't expected it to be. This cave was only for seasoned professionals with expert standards, not beginners. I took my time, careful and meticulous with every movement, and before long I was rewarded with a beautiful interior made up of many tunnels and pools of water. I picked a tunnel and made my way through, feeling for the millionth time extremely grateful to not be claustrophobic as I crawled across the floor on my hands and knees. Again, I was rewarded by a beautiful cavern filled with phosphorus rocks illuminating the room and all sorts of stalagmites and stalactites. I took the GoPro off my shoulder to make sure I got all of the beauty on camera when I noticed something on the screen. What I had thought was a pile of rocks or crystals with my limited vision was now clearer looking with the camera. I moved slightly closer, and for the first time ever, on one of my exploring trips, I felt the grip of fear, because the camera showed clearly now it was in fact a pile of bones. Lots and lots of bones, including several skulls. Of course, discovering bones deep inside a cave isn't the most extraordinary thing you'll ever come across. All sorts of animals have lived in these caverns over the centuries they've been here, and I'd found them before scattered around the cave floor, but this was different. You see, for one, they were piled up, not discarded after the meal had ended, piled quite neatly. And secondly, they were all human. Just as I processed this, I heard a noise. Again, not the weirdest thing to happen. Caves make sounds, rocks moving, water dripping, the occasional flapping of a bat wing. but this was something I'd never heard before and brought instant ice-cold fear into my veins. The best way I can describe it now was that it was a sort of a squeal. Self-preservation mode kicked in, and I grabbed one of the large bones from the pile and spun myself around, ready to strike. Complete and utter terror almost overcame me as the light on my helmet illuminated a creature in front of me roughly the same height and build as myself. It was quite human-esque but hairy, its arms long, more ape-like, and its head was grotesque, with a wide worm-type mouth and no eyes. I screamed but also smacked it with the bone which it hadn't been expecting, and it squealed back at me as I hit it again and again. It soon retreated back into the corner of the cave and I made a run for it, racing back through the cave, crawling as fast as possible through the tunnels and not stopping until I ascended back to the surface and was in my car. I sped back to the college, and only when I reached my dorm did I start to calm down a little. That was when I reached for the GoPro and realized I must have dropped it and left it in the cave when the thing appeared. I was still shaking and crying when my roommate appeared later. Of course, no one believes me. I have no proof and it sounds ridiculous. I must have hallucinated it, imagined it, or even just plain made it up. Why would I do that? No. Something is down there, living in those caves. Something not quite human. I was incredibly lucky to get away. But I'm going back, and I'll be more prepared this time. And if I live to tell the tale for a second time, you can be sure I'll have the evidence to prove it. Are you a thrill seeker? Have you ever partaken in an activity that many would be too scared to endure? And have you ever seen anything unexplained during one of those expeditions? Sometimes when we dismiss someone's experience or perception, we may be the one who has to suffer with it next, like in this story inspired by Sam. When I was 17, we lived in an old house in a town in India where my dad and his siblings had grown up. My parents still live there and my little brother too. I moved away a year ago. You see, I start hyperventilating every time I'd have to step out of the house after dark. I was sick of being called a scaredy cat by my cousins when I refused to go out to the porch and sit and talk every time they'd visit for the holidays. I wish more people knew what it's like to be scared out of their wits. But at the same time, I wouldn't want anyone to see what I saw and go through what I went through in the month that followed the incident. I loved our home. It was old and had that vintage feel to it. I especially liked the back porch. Plants and succulents decorated the corners. Lanterns with a pretty yellow hue hung from the pillars above the stairs. But most of all, I had a round swing chair where I would often sit and read. If that wasn't the coziest thing, I don't know what is. I was on that porch the time I cried on my mom's lap when I went through my first breakup, and the time when we got our beloved puppy, Leo. Happy memories, sad memories, you name it, the house had seen it. One evening after dinner, I was doing my own thing, enjoying some me time, just sitting under the stairs on the last step, content, peaceful. Leo lay beside my foot on the freshly mowed grass, snoring soundly as I tried and failed to strum my guitar in sync with his snores. As I continued strumming, I felt a weirdly frigid gush of wind blow my hair to the side. A chill ran up my spine, and the hair at the back of my neck stood on end, like thorns on a rose stem. It was the middle of May in western peninsular India. Hot? Very much. Humid? Sure. But cold? No way in hell. As if on cue, Leo suddenly stood up and started throatily growling at the narrow walkway. On one side of the path was the fence that separated our lawn from the neighbors. And on the other side was a wall of our storeroom that was built separately from the rest of the house. I didn't think too much of it because he'd stopped growling as soon as he started and was just standing there staring into the darkness. As I continued strumming, my gaze wandered towards the end of the walkway, which is where I saw her. She was wearing a white sari. The piece of clothing was clean to the point where it appeared to be glowing in the dark. and her long black hair dragged behind her as she walked. The strangest part was her walk, or more accurately, her not walk. It looked like she was skateboarding, minus the skateboard. I stopped playing as soon as I saw her glide past the opening of our walkway to the following house. Big mistake. I don't know if she heard the music stop or just sensed my gaze, but she zoomed back into my line of vision. Now that I had a clear view, I could see her face. She had spotless alabaster skin that was so pale that it looked like it was painted on with white acrylic. Her golden eyes were gleaming so bright that they looked like yellow orbs of fire. Leo didn't make a sound, and I too watched, paralyzed, as her emotionless face turned into a snarl. She then opened her mouth and let out an ear-piercing shriek that sounded demonic and started gliding straight at me, full speed ahead. I realized what was going on, or rather, what was going to happen if I didn't move immediately. A choked sound escaped my throat, and I threw my guitar on the lawn to create a barrier between me and that disgusting, ghastly creature. "Come on, Leo!" I yelled, and with all my might started sprinting up the stairs, hopefully with him in tow. I reached the top stair and extended my hand toward the netted screen door when I felt a pain shoot through the back of my head like my hair was being ripped off. I screamed loudly as I pulled backwards back down the stairs and then slammed on the damp grass. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up a couple of hours later in the hospital with an IV drip in my arm. Dad told me that they thought I'd been stung by a scorpion that had likely been lurking on the porch. I frantically told my parents what had really happened. They just stood there, looking at me with tired and concerned expressions. I told them how everything was hurting, but the doctor had an explanation for that. The scorpion bite was causing the fever and muscle aches. I mentioned how the back of my head was still stinging, but my mom had an explanation for that too. I must have hit my head on the stairs when I fell down after being stung. I sighed in disbelief and exhaustion and asked if Leo was okay. They said he was protectively sniffing around me when they rushed out after hearing screams and barks. I requested they stay the night at the hospital, and he went home in the morning. Since then, I've had many nightmares about it. Sometimes I would see it play out exactly how it happened. Sometimes I would see different people, my friends, family members with me. Sometimes it would be a different place, and sometimes just in broad daylight. But the gliding lady in white would always be there in my thoughts, awake or asleep. Shortly after, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. My parents just gave me sympathetic looks after either of them would wake me up from sleep, saying I was screaming and thrashing around yet again. I can see why they don't believe me. And while he does agree with me, I know my therapist doesn't either. My brother likes to hear about it from time to time, and so do my friends. So now it has become a scary sleepover story, an urban legend, and there is nothing I can do about it. I'm not sure why I decided to share this here. I'm even starting to doubt my own memory at this point. It sucks when you know something happened, but no one will believe you. Maybe it was all just a terrible nightmare. Or maybe she's out there, waiting, and next time, she'll leave a body as evidence. I just pray it isn't mine. Have you ever questioned your own memory, or even your own sanity? How were you able to get a grasp on what was real or not? This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Anna Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman. If you have a story you'd like to submit, send me an email at somethingscary@snarled.com. Don't forget to watch the video version of Something Scary over at youtube.com/snarled. And if you'd like to support the show and everything we do at Snarled, join our Patreon at patreon.com/snarled.